Hello, my name is Sarah Lipton, and this is my self-reflection video for Intro to Ethnic Studies this semester. I'll admit that when I first enrolled in this class, I thought it would mostly focus on cultural diversity and identity, and while those were certainly part of it, I quickly realized this course was so much deeper than just celebrating differences. It asked us to look critically at how systems of power, oppression, resistance, and survival have shaped and continue to shape our lives, institutions, and histories. One of the concepts that captured my attention was the opposing concepts of blood quantum versus one-drop policies. Blood quantum and one-drop policies represent contrasting yet equally racialized mechanisms of identity control rooted in colonial and white supremacist logics. Blood quantum laws, primarily applied to Native American populations, were designed by settler colonial governments to limit indigenous citizenship by requiring individuals to prove a minimum percentage of, quote, native blood. This system served to erode tribal populations over generations and undermine tribal sovereignty. In contrast, the one-drop rule, historically used in the United States to classify individuals as black even if they had only, quote, one drop of African ancestry, functioned to expand the boundaries of blackness and reinforce racial hierarchies under slavery and Jim Crow segregation. While blood quantum sought to disappear indigenous peoples through exclusion, the one-drop rule aimed to contain and control black populations through hyper-inclusion. Both are state-imposed racial regimes that deny the legitimacy of self-identification and cultural belonging, illustrating how race has been strategically constructed and manipulated to maintain systems of power and dispossession. The forced assimilation practices in Module 4.4 through boarding schools also really hit me hard. I had learned about some of these things before, but not in this kind of context, seeing how they were part of a much larger system aimed at destroying indigenous identity and sovereignty. I also remember the example of Standing Rock and the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline being used to show how these issues are very much alive today. Indigenous people are still fighting to protect their land and sacred sites from extractive industries, and these fights are not symbolic. They're about survival, sovereignty, and climate justice. A second module that had a deep impact on me was Module 8.5 on reproductive justice. While reproductive rights typically referred to the legal access to contraception and abortion, the framework of reproductive justice expands far beyond individual choice to encompass the social, economic, and political conditions that shape reproductive lives, especially for people of color. Originating from the work of Black women activists in the 1990s, reproductive justice critiques mainstream feminist movements for centering white, middle-class women's experiences and failing to address the intersecting oppressions that minorities face. For communities of color, reproductive freedom is not only about the right to terminate a pregnancy, but also about the right to have children, to raise them in safe and healthy environments, and to parent with dignity, free from state violence, environmental racism, forced sterilization, and economic exploitation. Reproductive justice recognizes that issues like immigration status, incarceration, housing insecurity, and systemic racism all impact reproductive autonomy. It shifts the focus to center on the lived realities of those historically excluded from dominant feminist narratives. The third module I want to talk about is Module 6, Immigration. This section really opened my eyes to how immigration laws have never been race neutral. From the Chinese Exclusion Act to Operation Wetback, we saw how the state has used immigration policy to define who, quote, belongs and who doesn't, often based on race, labor needs, or political convenience. One thing that made me think was about the so-called, quote, good immigrants versus, quote, bad immigrants, how narratives are shaped to uplift some immigrants while criminalizing others. Think of how immigrants from European countries were once seen as undesirable, but are now seen as part of the American success story. Just in the last few weeks, we have seen the current administration celebrating the immigration of white South Africans, while daily demonizing Venezuelans. Latinx, African, and Middle Eastern immigrants are often painted as threats or burdens. This showed me how much of immigration discourse is built on racial ideology rather than fairness or law. This made me consider the concept of freedom of movement. It's not merely the ability to travel or migrate. It is a deeply racialized and politicized right that has been historically denied to marginalized communities. Colonialism, slavery, settler violence, and immigration law have all functioned to regulate and restrict the movement of racialized peoples. Enslaved Africans were forcibly transported and denied autonomy over their bodies, while indigenous peoples were displaced and confined to reservations. In the contemporary era, immigration enforcement, border militarization, and surveillance technologies disproportionately target Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, transforming mobility into a privilege rather than a right. The concept of, quote, illegality itself is a racialized construct that criminalizes movement across borders while obscuring the colonial histories that created those borders. Freedom of movement must therefore be understood in relation to state power, racial capitalism, and resistance struggles, from the Underground Railroad to sanctuary movements. In this view, mobility is not neutral. It's a site of contestation where racial hierarchies are enforced or dismantled. Now I will go ahead and present my Chicano Studies slideshow, which was on Chapter 3.1, Contested and Competing Meanings in Chicanics and Latinx Studies. Nuances in Chicanics and Latinx Studies. Let's discuss some key terms, and please excuse any mispronunciation here. I will do my best. First, we have Chicanismo, a political ideology tied to pride and Mexican heritage. It's empowering for many, but also controversial due to its strong political associations, which some more conservative or apolitical Mexican Americans may reject. Next, the debate between Chicanics and Chicanics, reflecting different identity priorities. Chicanic is often used by U.S.-born Mexicans with political awareness, and Chicanics emphasizes indigenous roots, shown by the use of the X. Then there's Latinx, a term that arose from LGBTQIA+ communities to avoid gendered language. Though it promotes inclusivity, some criticize it as unnecessary or linguistically foreign to Spanish-speaking communities. Finally, La Raza and La Raza Cosmica refer to pan-Latinx unity and racial mixing, while unifying the idea of a cosmic race has been criticized for reinforcing Eurocentric hierarchies instead of challenging them. This chapter highlights important historical figures. Dolores Huerta, co-founder of the United Farm Workers, played a major role in the farm worker movement and coined the phrase "Si se puede," or "yes we can." Despite her key contributions, she faced significant gender discrimination even within activist spaces. Reyes Lopez Tijerina is another major figure. He advocated for Mexican-American land rights under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. His activism included both peaceful protests and more radical actions, making him a complex figure. Some important symbols and movements discussed were Aztlán, a central idea of Chicanics identity, a symbolic homeland in the U.S. Southwest tied to indigenous ancestry. Its historic accuracy is debated, but it remains a powerful symbol for cultural identity. Lastly, Chicanics and Latinx feminism, pushing for women's inclusion and recognition within the Chicano movement and broader feminism. Chicanics feminists challenge machismo, or patriarchal attitudes, and also fight against marginalization from white mainstream feminism. Okay, that's all I have for you. Thank you, Professor Ruiz, for creating a space where these hard conversations could happen. I'm leaving this class not only with more knowledge, but with more questions and the motivation to keep learning and unlearning. Thank you.